aging. Everybody does it, nobody loves it. But if you're not sleeping well, you're speeding your clock forward, not back. 80 million Americans struggle every night. Twice that number suffer at least once per week. Turn Back Your Clock is speaking with top sleep experts and therapists to help you get better sleep and more of it. Welcome to the Pursuit of Sleepiness interview series.
Hello, everybody. This is James Kuhn, Turn Back Your Clock with James Kuhn, and we're doing the Pursuit of Sleepiness series. I have with us today Martin Reed. Martin Reed is the founder of Insomnia Coach. It is a company that offers sleep coaching programs that give people with insomnia all the skills and support they need to enjoy better sleep for the rest of their lives. Martin holds a master's degree in health and wellness education, a certification in clinical sleep health. He is also an affiliate member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and a certified health education specialist, as well as an ACE certified health coach. So total hack, probably doesn't know what he's talking about. No, obviously he's got the credentials, and we're here to learn some great things from him here today. Martin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Why don't you give us a little bit of a background in your own words? I mean, I did the curriculum vitae, but, why don't you give us a little bit of your background about how, you came to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sleep was never something that I'd ever really given much thought to. And I think that applies for a lot of people who have never struggled with sleep. It's just something we don't ever think about. And as you've probably detected from the accent, although I'm in the US, I'm not American. I was born in the UK and I emigrated to the US in 2008. And that was when my sleep problems began. Which on reflection is to be expected. It's like I'm moving to a new country. I was getting married. And there was a time of a lot of upheaval in my life. And so exactly. So I experienced some sleep disruption. And then I was like, okay, fair enough, because we all have bad nights every now and then, but I kind of couldn't shake it off. It was the next night, and then it was the next night. And then as these nights of sleep disruption kind of kept on happening, I became more and more worried and concerned about my sleep. Like, what's going on? Have I lost my ability to sleep? Am I ever going to sleep again? Like, I'm going to fall sick. Is this going to affect my health and the rest of my life? And so I did what most of us do, even back then, but we still had Google in 2008. You go to Google and you look for solutions to insomnia and sleep issues. And I just found there was so much nonsense out there. I mean, I tried them all. I tried almost everything I read, and nothing really worked. And every time you try something and it doesn't work, you become more worried about your sleep, because you're like, oh no, that's another thing that didn't work.
Right.
And I feel that by chance I came across these techniques, which I now know are these cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia techniques, CBTi techniques, specifically sleep restriction, bedtime restriction, and stimulus control, which involves getting out of bed when you can't sleep. Kind of gave these a try for a few weeks, and my sleep started to get better. And I thought, well, this is working for me. Surely this can work for other people. And that's really how I got involved in sleep and insomnia, right? Just basically from my own experience all that time ago.
Mm-hmm. So, you kind of mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy. That seems to be a very promising modality and approach to helping people with a lot of things, including sleep disorders. What was it about CBT that attracted you?
Well, I think first of all, because I knew that the techniques worked for me, so I suspected that they'd probably be helpful for other people. If we would just have if the message about it was out there. Even today, it's still really hard to dig down into all the insomnia information out there and find CBTi. But the reason I think it's effective is because it tackles these root causes of insomnia and all the things that perpetuate the insomnia. So it's just kind of this collection of techniques that change the way you think about sleep, because a lot of us have thoughts about sleep that aren't always accurate or aren't always helpful. So it changes the way you think about sleep, but it also gives you these behavioral changes. It gives you this game plan that you can follow You can kind of just engage your robot mind, switch off all this mental chatter and just implement these behavioral techniques. And as long as you're committed and consistent, almost everyone sees results within a few weeks to a few months of implementation. And that's just why I'm such a big fan of CBTi for insomnia.
That sounds very promising. Are there any, for people who've never really heard of it before, or people who have, but maybe, are there common misconceptions out there, that I know with hypnosis, people think, being hypnotized, they're going to run around like clucking like a chicken, out of control or something. Are there any kinds of, myths or misconceptions that we could dispel about CBT that might get people to shake off an objection that they might have to approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's really important to stress that CBTi isn't sleep hygiene, because a lot of people, when you talk about CBTi as like this collection of techniques, people just automatically think a lot of the time that maybe this is sleep hygiene related. And sleep hygiene doesn't work for people with chronic insomnia. And yeah, it's always the first thing that people tend to try because the sleep hygiene advice is ranked really well on Google, and medical professionals will often just start with saying, oh, implement sleep hygiene. So right from the start, when you talk CBTi and people think, oh, well, that's just sleep hygiene, I've tried that, didn't work, and then they kind of discount it. Mm-hmm. So that's the first kind of common myth that I really want to just get out there, is that CBTi is not sleep hygiene. And if you've tried sleep hygiene and it didn't work for you, that's normal and it's to be expected, because sleep hygiene doesn't work for people with chronic insomnia. It's more of this preventative thing that helps you.
Regardless.
Yeah. A colleague of mine, Michael Schwartz, he always kind of makes this association between sleep hygiene and dental hygiene. So he says it's always a good idea to brush your teeth to keep your teeth healthy. Once you've got that cavity, i.e. once you've got the insomnia, no amount of brushing your teeth and no amount of sleep hygiene is going to help. So that's when you kind of need
to paste and call it a day.
Yeah, exactly. Things that, although the word therapy is in the name of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, it's not really this, what we would perceive to be therapy in terms of like you're lying on a couch and sharing all your thoughts and feelings. Really, it's more of a collection of techniques that just help to change the way you think about sleep and just change your behaviors towards sleep. Yeah, exactly. So they're really the two primary kind of things that I think are important for people to know about CBTi.
What other, common conditions are effectively treated, by CBTi, just out of curiosity?
Well, CBTi specifically is just for insomnia. But if you chop off the eye, then really there are lots of different conditions. I mean, primarily we see anxiety and depression as two of the key conditions that are often treated with CBT. This isn't something I get into because I'm not a licensed therapist and my specialization is specifically insomnia. But when you look at cognitive behavioral therapy without the eye, then you typically see it helpful for people with anxiety and depression. And I think that perhaps that's another reason why it's so helpful for people with sleep, because anxiety in particular is often a really key component of sleep disruption.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Stress and anxiety and worry are going to, have it. And it has a biochemical impact because it can cause you to have adrenaline rush and release of cortisol, and all these things start throwing off. Your hormones get out of balance. I mean, it's amazing how they all work together to screw up your plan of getting good sleep.
Right.
Why? Talk about it if you can, a little bit about how and why it works. I mean, is it kind of just rewiring kind of the thought processes?
The cognitive side definitely does. So with the cognitive side, it's more about just trying to explain that very few of us need 8 hours of sleep. Right? Very few of us actually get 8 hours of sleep, but yet many of us think that that's what we need to strive for.
Mhm.
So this is one way that CBTi is helpful, because it kind of releases any pressure that you might be putting yourself under to get this predetermined, this preset amount of sleep that's probably not right for you anyway. And also just understanding how sleep works, that waking during the night, for example, is completely normal. And the fact that it might take you 20 minutes, 30 minutes to fall asleep at the start of the night is completely normal. So on the cognitive side, yeah, I definitely think there is kind of like this rewiring going on, because it just gives you more realistic expectations and a better understanding of sleep in general. But then the behavior side of things just really help. I'll just talk about the two key ones, which is sleep restriction, probably better known as bedtime restriction. And this involves looking at your current average nightly sleep duration and trying to more closely match the amount of time you allot for sleep to what you're currently actually getting. Because what this does is it just reduces the amount of time you spend in bed awake, tossing and turning, trying to sleep. So more of the time that you're in bed is spent asleep instead of awake. And it leads to more consolidated sleep as well. And that has far more of an impact on how you feel the following day than the hours of sleep you get. And then with the second core technique is stimulus control. And this involves getting out of bed when you can't sleep. So when you're really struggling, you're tossing and turning, you're wide awake, you just can't fall back to sleep. You get out of bed and you feel relaxed and sleepy again. And then you return to bed. And this helps prevent you learning or reinforcing this idea that the bed is a place where you are awake, where you are frustrated, where you're tossing and turning. So kind of for a lot of people with insomnia, they've learned that the bed is not a pleasant place to be. So say it will be 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you check your clock and you're like, oh my goodness, in 5 or 6 hours, I'm going to have to go to that place. Yes, I'm going to have to go through that torture. So this helps you unlearn this association where you've associated the bed as a bad place to be. And that's really the second core technique that you'll find in CBTi that's really helpful.
So let me ask, because I think, when I was listing sleep tips to kind of just, throw out there for people to try, and some of them probably fall within the rubric of sleep hygiene, but some of them seem like they would be, reinforcing behaviors, for, the CBTi, such as, trying to go to bed and wake up roughly at like on a same schedule, like 7 days a week, instead of sleeping in on the weekends, because it kind of throws off your circadian rhythm. Would that kind of dovetail with what you're talking about? Some of those?
Yeah, well, getting out of bed at the same time every day, that really is key, because this gives your body clock this strong morning anchor. So it always has this consistent kind of reset point, if you like that's the body clock's reset button. So that's really important. And it helps ensure that you're building up enough sleep drive during the day to help you feel sleepy and go to sleep at night. The one issue is when people talk about the consistent sleep schedule, they'll often also say go to bed at the same time every night. And I have a bit of a problem with that, because your only real guide for when to go to sleep at night should be when you're sleepy. So if, for example, if you're following the standard sleep hygiene advice that says go to bed and get out of bed at the same time every day, let's say you have 10 o'clock as your bedtime. What if you don't feel sleepy at 10 o'clock? What's going to happen? You're going to go to bed, you're going to struggle to fall asleep, and that's going to increase your anxiety levels and make it harder for you to fall asleep. So it's good to have like an earliest possible bedtime, just to make sure that you're always giving yourself enough time throughout the day to build sleep drive. But once that time arrives, you should use sleepiness as your guide for when to actually go to bed.
Okay. Why do you think it works so effectively? I mean, the evidence is there, why versus, relaxation techniques and stuff like that. Why do you think that this is so effective?
Well, I think it's effective because it just gets to the root cause of the problem. So what we see with insomnia is it's kind of there's like these three factors that kind of trigger and perpetuate insomnia. And you have this sleep drive disruption, which is basically when you're going to bed before you're sufficiently sleepy enough for sleep, or you're not sleepy enough when you go to bed. We have like a body clock disruption, which is when we keep these irregular sleep schedules. When one day we'll get out of bed at 6 a.m, another day 9 o'clock, maybe on the weekends 11 o'clock. So that we have that body clock disruption, and then we have the big one, which is arousal, which is kind of related to anxiety. And so we just have this cognitive arousal, which is just the thought processes, the sleep-related thoughts and worries that keep us awake. There's this physiological arousal, which you mentioned earlier, which is more to do with the body's response to anxiety and arousal, so like a racing heart or sweats. Some people describe it as they notice their feet getting really hot, just things like that. And then we have this conditioned arousal, which I touched upon earlier, where you see your bed as a place for wakefulness and worry and anxiety instead of sleep and relaxation. And CBTi just tackles all of these. And because it's this collection of skills and techniques, once you've learned them, once you're familiar with them, and once you've reaped the benefits of them, they're with you for life. And this is why I'm such a big believer in them, because let's say you get your sleep back on track, 5 years down the line, you go through another period of poor sleep. You don't need to go on, load up Amazon and look for those supplements again, or go to the store. You just reintroduce the skills that you already know work. They're with you for life. And this is why I'm just such a big proponent of CBTi.
Yeah, for me, I would go to sleep, and I actually would fall asleep fairly easily. I cut out TV, got electronics out of my bedroom, stuff like that, and I would just, whatever I was interested in reading, and I'd be nice and comfortable, and I would read, and eventually my eyes would get heavy, and usually not that long of amount of time, and I'd go to sleep, and it would be fairly early, but I would wake up, and when I woke up, whatever things that I had concerns about would literally jump into the front of my mind, and it would almost be like a startle response. Like it would wake me up like fight or flight, like an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
And then I'd look at the clock and I'd see that I'd only been sleeping for 2 hours, and I'm like, oh, great. Now, and I'd pick up that same book, and I could probably finish the book at that point, because I could literally just read it, and it's just getting closer and closer to tea time. I'm like, I need to, go to sleep somehow. And eventually I would break down, and I would, take something that I knew was going to make me feel like crap the next day. And that was my particular story. But I think that's probably leads into my next question. Is that one of the more common, I guess, threads that you see among all of the people that you've helped, is that a lot of it is an anxiety or stress related things that are giving them their sleep problems?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever worked with a client where anxiety doesn't play some kind of role. And for some people, it may be less of an influence, and for other people, it is quite clearly the primary problem. So yeah, that is very common. And there's different ways of approaching it. You still have all these standard CBTi techniques, but there's also other things you can do. Like if you notice, for example, like you said, you're waking up with all these thoughts and worries that you're having. Sometimes it can be helpful to schedule time during the day, like late afternoon, not too close to bedtime, or what I like to call it constructive thinking, because it's far more constructive to give yourself permission to think these thoughts through during the day when you're a little bit more awake and a little bit more alert, maybe a little bit more rational, compared to 3 a.m. when you're in a dark room all by yourself. It's always harder to think more clearly. And you just kind of think through the thoughts and the worries, or even your to-do list, things that you tend to find come into your head at night and make it harder for you to fall asleep. And you just give yourself permission, 15, 20 minutes to just think about them. If there's a solution, write down what the solution is. If there doesn't seem to be a solution to that problem right now, just make a note of that too. Just getting it out on paper, giving yourself that chance during the day to think things through. And then if during the night you notice that these thoughts are coming back, you can just tell yourself, well, I've already thought about these things during the day when I was more cognitively able to process them rationally. So if I want to think about them some more, then I can do that in tomorrow's constructive thinking time. And just kind of not trying to suppress these thoughts, but just allocating time during the day for them. That can be very helpful sometimes too.
Okay. So I think I remember seeing a number, something like, more than 5,000 people that you've worked with that were having trouble, specifically people having trouble sleeping. That's all you focus on. And I don't know if that's from, a couple of years ago, or that's more of a current number, but you've helped an awful lot of people with insomnia. Let's manage people's expectations. What's it like when people start working with you? How long, is the average time, for somebody to work with you to achieve the kind of results that, they're looking for, which is getting back to sleep more regularly?
Yeah, well, it's going to sound like a cop-out answer, but really everyone is different. So I think key to managing expectations is to realize that you as an individual are unique. And not to hold yourself to other people's successes or other people's benchmarks. What I tend to find is that the first few weeks tend to be the most difficult, because few people get results as soon as they start implementing the techniques. It's very rare for someone to suddenly within a week notice that they're sleeping significantly better. So really, the first few weeks are all about just focusing on implementation, not necessarily looking for results or monitoring for results, but just putting all your attention to implementing the techniques that you're learning. With my online course, it lasts for 8 weeks. And I find that the vast majority of people, by the end of that 8 weeks, they're noticing very significant improvements in their sleep. Some people notice more improvements than others. Some people notice improvements earlier on than others. So everyone's different in that regard. But I tend to say, if you're serious about trying these CBTi techniques, you really want to give yourself like at least 2 months of just consistent implementation before you look to then evaluate the effectiveness. It's really a long-term strategy. I like to, just as it took time for insomnia to become entrenched and just become this big problem, it's going to take time to kind of pick away at it and undo that issue to get your sleep back on track.
And so you mentioned the online course. I guess people can find that in your website, and at the end of the video, all your contact information will be, put up for people to be able to reach out to you. But I guess that's where they would go to look into the online.
Yeah, everything is on my website, insomniacoach.com. I offer online coaching, phone coaching, and there's also a free sleep training course too, which is you just type in your email address, and every day for 2 weeks you get an email that gives you basically the core of these CBTi techniques, and it helps change the way you think about sleep, and it gives you these behavioral strategies and techniques that you can implement to help improve your sleep.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because our plan is to everybody that is accessing these courses, I plan to, in your case, enroll people with their email into your course. They can obviously opt out if they're not interested in being in it, but we'll put them in and they can give it a shot. And I would advise anybody that that's watching this that they should give them, they owe themselves the opportunity of taking this tested and proven method, approach to addressing sleeplessness. They should give it a legitimate try. You did mention phone coaching. So with that, do you do any kind of face-to-face like we're doing right now, or is it just strictly voice?
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely the client's choice. Some people don't want to show themselves on video, which is fine. So we can either do video chat, just like we're doing now, or just voice. And the standard way I approach this is I kind of offer what I call the phone coaching package, and it's It starts with a 1-hour phone call where we just talk about sleep, identify what the issues are, and we kind of work together to formulate this 2-week plan based on implementing CBTi techniques. And the client will keep a sleep diary as they progress over the 2 weeks. At the end of the first week, then they'll send the diary over to me, just email the sleep diary. I'll look at it and see if there's any feedback that I can give based on what I see in the sleep diary, encouragement. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we look at the sleep diary again, but we have like this half-an-hour follow-up call. And from there, we can decide the best way of moving forward. But I find that's a good introduction. It's really good for people that are really highly motivated and feel that they don't need quite so much hand-holding. For people that have a lot more concern and feel like they might need a little bit more guidance and support over a longer period, the online course tends to be most appropriate for those people.
Excellent. Well, you answered the last couple of questions I had, which were, whether you're telemed capable, which you are, and what to expect in the first, encounters with you, which you kind of, nicely summarized that. So I think people will have a pretty good idea of what to expect. The last thing that I always like to, run by, the sleep experts that I'm speaking with is whether is there a takeaway or even an idea or an exercise or a technique or something people could wrap their heads around or even look at to kind of gear them up towards the idea of pursuing CBT as a way to go with their, addressing their sleeplessness.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, just paying attention to your own body's cues for sleepiness, for when to go to bed, like we kind of discussed earlier. A lot of people, when I first start working with them, they have this kind of set bedtime. Maybe it's not like completely rigid, it might not be 11 o'clock on the dot, but it could be, I go to bed between 11 and 11:30. And then you ask them how long it takes them to fall asleep. Oh, maybe an hour or two, maybe sometimes longer. So that suggests to me that they're using the clock as a guide for when to go to bed instead of their own levels of sleepiness. So really, I think it's such a key change in thought process to just pay attention to your own level of sleepiness for when to go to bed. So that's really a good first place to start. And then, as we discussed earlier, always being out of bed at the same time every day, even on weekends. And finally, just not striving for this 8 hours of sleep. Nobody knows where this whole idea that we all need 8 hours of sleep comes from. We have no explanation from it. I was working with a client and she was doing really well with these CBTi techniques. She's getting around 7 hours of sleep at night, and her doctor says, "Oh no, that's not good enough. You need to be going for 8 hours. Everybody needs 8 hours of sleep." Yeah. So, and I said to her, well, next time he says that to you, maybe you should just ask him where he's getting this information from. Like, where's the scientific basis for this claim that you need 8 hours? Because it does not exist. And just knowing that too can just be a huge relief and just help ease any pressure you might be putting yourself under to get a certain number of hours of sleep.
Probably some byproduct from like the Industrial Revolution, where they're like, okay, you're going to spend this much time at the factory, this much time taking care of stuff, this much time sleeping, lather, rinse, repeat. Where I don't know where they get these things from, but
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, Martin, it's been a pleasure. I think that we've learned a lot here today. I'm glad that people are going to be able to see this and pick some some good information up. They will be able to reach out to you directly if they would like to work with you. I'm going to sign them up on your email course so they can start getting a taste. And again, thank you for being here with us. This has been Martin Reed, founder of insomniacoach.com. Martin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure.